Hello, this is Robert Schiff, the Director of Palmdale City Library, and we welcome you to this session of Bridge Builders, a program that we actually began during the COVID pandemic lockdown, and we're grateful to be able to continue it now. The library has been open for full services for some time now. We want everyone to be aware of that, so come in and see us, take advantage of our online offerings, of course. But this program is near and dear to our hearts, and we appreciate all those who have been making it possible, and look forward to today's session and learning more about Kacey. Just a little bit about the library. If you're not aware, we are open Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., Friday and Saturday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., and on Sundays from 1 to 5 p.m. And we also have a wide variety of programs. We really do. We're particularly proud of Bridge Builders. We have story time for the little ones all the way up to book clubs for all ages. Well, not necessarily all ages, but for the older folks like me, and then all kinds of programs in between. So we encourage you to follow us, follow our website, follow us on Facebook and Instagram to keep up with the many things going on. So just briefly, I'd like to let Josephine Trott introduce yourself, if you'd like to, Josephine, please.
Hello, my name is Josephine Trott. I'm the Public Services Manager here at the Palmdale City Library. That means that I manage the reference team and oversee all adult services. So that is why I'm here and helping out with this program.
All right, thank you, Josephine. And she is the wizard behind the curtain for this program. So, and then I'll turn it over to Jesse, our facilitator, and let him introduce himself, and then you can introduce our special guest, Kacey.
All right, thank you, Robert. Well, for those who don't know, I'm a writer with the Valley Press, and I've been writing with them since about 2018 and covering local music within the Valley, and then, or people who have, come from the Antelope Valley and have moved on to other places. And, that's sort of a document of what's going on with our local culture. And this Zoom program is an extension of that. Outside of that, I tour as a backline tech, and I set up different, gear and pieces of equipment for different bands. Lita Ford and Venice, who I work with most consistently. But most importantly, I am in a band with the fabulous Kacey Jaeger here, and we are called Ryder Waite. And we love collaborating with each other, writing music with each other, and I feel like when you're around such talented people, it hones and sharpens your skills as a musician, even if you're not directly pursuing what they do. And I'm very fortunate to be in a band with Kacey. So I figured I would bring her on today and embarrass her by complimenting her like that in public and pick her brain about songwriting. So today's theme is sort of songwriting, and I would say creativity in general, and how that could be a positive benefit for your mental health. So, Kacey, without further ado, I have your bio here on my, yeah, and I will read through that a little bit. So, starting off, you sort of began your career or I would say just beginning playing music. Music was around a lot. I remember we've talked about in your household, and there were certain artists that really resonated with you from a young age, like Fleetwood Mac and Carole King being the most prominent of your influences. So it kind of started off with you playing with, at open mic nights and family parties and, doing church functions and stuff like that. So just before we get into your process, just talk about sort of the beginning of your music career and where that started and where that sort of led you.
Yeah, I just my family, they're both or my parents are both musicians. My dad has been a guitar player since he was in 4th grade, so he was teaching lessons in like our studio set up in the backyard constantly, so I was always around musicians, and he was in other bands and had musician friends over, and like he was also part of the worship team at our church. So I would like get there early with him and watch all these musicians like set up and sing and stuff. And I just decided that like that was something that I wanted to be a part of. So I would just go around the house and just start singing songs in front of everybody. much to their, detriment in their ears. And like, I didn't know how to sing. I didn't have any technique, but I would just put on shows. Like it would be playtime with me and my siblings. And I wanted to find a way to turn it into like, how can I make this into a play for my parents? Like right now, like, so always doing improv, always singing along to different things in the car. And finally, I think they got to the point where they were like, this has gone on long enough. We need to get her vocal lessons. Cause if I'm going to do it, might as well do it well. So,
Right.
They signed me up with Mel Booker Music. So I was taking lessons there, and a couple years into doing that, they saw on KTLA Channel 5 News, Debbie Gibson from the 80s. And
Just the 80s.
the 80s. They saw her on there doing a segment where she was talking about this like performing arts camp that she was going to start, and that it was going to be for kids from like, I think it was like 10 to 21. Like it was pretty wide range. She was like, we're going to have auditions on this weekend, so feel free to come out. And so my parents saw it and they were like, hey, so this Saturday we're going down to Hollywood. And I was like, wow, so exciting. They were like, also you're auditioning for something. And I went, what? But I auditioned and was able to like meet her and get into that camp. And that's kind of how I jumped into being into the music scene out here and all that stuff.
Yeah. Just side note, do you think you would have been more nervous if they had told you like way ahead of time that that's what you were going to do instead of springing it on you?
Probably not. They did mention, like my mom came up to me and she was like, do you know who Debbie Gibson is? And I was like, no. She was like, well, she's a big deal. And I went, okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
So probably not, actually. It was a lot more bold than I am now.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So, once you got, sort of introduced to her and sort of that world, I don't know, sort of, I know it's, not necessarily yesterday, but can you sort of describe what your mentality was like before and then during and after that whole process? Because I know when I first started to meet people and they mentored me, especially at a young age, I had that happen to me when I was in high school, and people, in the music business kind of taking me under their wing and just talking to me about this is how it works. And it's like, oh, it's kind of, there's a light switch that kind of goes off in your head. And you go, oh, okay, this is how it is. And you start putting those puzzle pieces together. What was, I know you're just a kid at that point, but what was your mentality like before you started doing the songwriting workshops with her and doing that stuff? And then how did that change?
I think prior to that, I didn't really understand what songwriting was in a technical sense. I watched an interview when I was like 8 or 7. I think, somewhere around then. And my favorite artist at the time, Hilary Duff, was saying, she's like, yeah, I write all my own songs. And I was like, wow, you can do that? I just had like no conception of like any of that kind of stuff. So then I was like, well, I guess I'm going to write my own songs. And I still have all of these, writings in a notebook somewhere. But essentially I just like wrote down like phrases that I had continuously heard all the time. Cause like, I feel like at 8 years old, you don't really have like an opinion on the world. So I just was like writing like different phrases, like want to be a dreamer and this and that, and like tell me the truth, like just different like things I had picked from other songs that I heard there here and there, but I had no concept of structure. And so I would just like sing these things, and my mom, I'd like sing them to my mom all the time. She'd be like, every single one of your songs sounds the same. And I was like, no, mom, this one's different because this one's about the color pink, and then this one's about this boy in my class. And so yeah, I just didn't have like, it was very like freeing. It was honestly more of an expression of like free writing. And then during the camp, it was like 2 weeks in the middle of summer, and they had, an itinerary throughout the day, every day at this camp, where it was like, okay, so for 2 hours, we're going to do acting. And then for this, we're going to do that. And for this time, we're going to do that. And then only one of the days for like an hour, they had like a little songwriting workshop. And she just asked, if anyone had anything, if they wanted to come up. And I was like, oh shit, people actually perform this? So I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, no, and I just raised my hand. And I got up there and I started singing this free-formed song about life shouldn't be rocket science. Like okay. But
Yeah.
like, I remember that line being in there, and I like sang it in front of everybody, and they were like, wow, that's so cool. I mean, you know, when you're like, I think at this point I was like 12. So when you're 12 years old and you can have like thought out sentences where they rhyme, I think in general people go, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Um,
But it sounds like you were doing vision boards before they were cool.
I feel like it. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
But I
Uh,
literally, oh, sorry, go ahead. You.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, although we're not necessarily a censored program, try to keep
Oh,
the
sorry.
yeah. I know it's so easy because I mean we're pretty much, you know, I'm talking to you from where we practice and it's so free form when we're there that yeah, you know, I get
Yeah,
you.
no, I'm sorry.
I usually have to stay very focused on not, you know, on keeping my own vocabulary straight, I guess.
Right, trying to keep it casual, but not that casual.
Yeah, exactly. You get it. But no, that's also, it's interesting because sort of before you're cognizant of certain things, like necessarily being afraid to put yourself out there or, you know, necessarily having a structure, you're kind of getting exposed to these different things early in your like writing process. So that's interesting.
Yeah. What I really liked about the whole, or like getting to meet her, I mean, so the cool thing about Debbie Gibson is that, and I believe she still has this to this day,
Mm-hmm.
but she has the record for the youngest person to write, record, and produce a #1 hit single. And she definitely still was the person that held that title when I met her. And if anyone's, sorry, my cat wants to scratch the post.
Cats and dogs are welcome in this stream, though, by the way. So
I agree. This is a pro quadruped stream. But yeah, I just had, or she, I guess, essentially was kind of like trying to breed this new, like, young songwriter group to see if somebody would want to break her record. And the cool thing about her was that she'd seen how, like, how much structure I had no conception of, and just the art of songwriting was more present than like the methodical thought out process of songwriting. And she didn't try to sway me in a different direction. She wasn't like, that's not right. She was like, that's really interesting, let's see what we can continue to bring out. And so after the camp, she invited me to like an intensive that she wanted to put on for like me and like maybe 3 other people from the camp. And we just like, that's where I really got to learn about processes and like what's really the different structures of like verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, or like, that's when I also started to listen to a bunch of different artists that I hadn't before. Like I never listened to the Beatles prior to like being 12 years old because my parents didn't listen to them, but I wanted to like really understand structure. And they're like a great band to start out with because a lot of their earlier material isn't verse, chorus. It's like A, or something like that. And so that's when I finally started to like kind of see the matrix. And I was like, oh, there's like, it's not just like something that just comes out in one 10-minute sitting and you're like, cool, I got a song. There's like work behind art and not just like, I don't know, this like free form self-expression thing I was doing.
Yeah, I think in the Eagles documentary, however you feel about that band, people out there, there was a part where Glenn Fry was talking about living with Jackson Browne in the 70s and that he would hear Jackson get up at like 6 or 7 in the morning, put on like, he'd hear the tea kettle, you know, like from the kitchen. I think this is what he was talking about. But then basically he would hear him get up every morning and start at the same time and like write songs, you know, and have a very disciplined structure to how he did that. And there's other writers that have talked about doing that too, where they would, from this time to this time every day, they would just sit at a typewriter regardless of feeling like the inspiration. And how old are you at this point? Like I think it's about 11. We were talking about this, like 11 years old, 12 years old.
Yeah, I think I was 11. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's such a leg up in like figuring out how to become a writer, you know, because a lot of people I feel like float through their whole 20s and then they don't figure it out until they're, you know, in their 30s or 40s, you know, as far as the structure of it. They're just kind of like free form creative and they can't put it in any kind of, you know, structure at all.
Yeah, 100%. I honestly, it's really interesting because now that I understand like the structure and of the art of songwriting, there's a part of me that wishes I actually could go back to that time where like I wasn't sitting there thinking like I need to write something that's really prolific, or I need like this section needs to have specifically this many lines, and I need this line to, help, push forward the narrative in this way. Like there's so much that goes on to songwriting that instead of it being back when I was 10, 11 years old, like I'd write and it would be like 20 minutes of just writing something out with no care in the world. I just was creating for the sake of creating. That like now I'll spend like weeks or months on songs. I have like these ideas that like I'll write a verse and I'm just so exhausted after that verse, I have to put it down and go do something else instead. So there's a bit of there's pros and cons to both, I think. But I mean, I definitely, think it's super cool that some people can sit down every day and be so disciplined. I wish that was me.
Yeah. Well, but that's also, I wanted to touch on this a little bit later. But we can talk about it now. You mentioned exhausting. Now, it's funny because I think of this series, it's called Bridge Builders, named after a song from our first guest, Ian McCartor, who did this program. Good friend of both of ours. And the thing is with that, it's sort of giving people an understanding or lessons that may not be creative people watching this, and stuff that they could take away from that and have some insight into their own lives or specific things that they're dealing with. And I feel like that's one of the best things that creative people can do, aside from just making works and music and art that people can take in and absorb and, sort of expand your perspective. It's also just talking about their perspective and sort of like, taking aspects from that, because there's a lot of valuable lessons there. And when you said exhausted with songwriting, some people would think like, well, what do you mean exhausted? You're just sitting at a piano or you're just sitting with your guitar and writing about how you feel. But talk about how, your songs, there'll be links in the description to your music, and the band's music for people that want to check that out. But for people that haven't heard you, your music is very emotional, and you're usually writing about some kind of heartbreak or it's a catharsis for you. And I think that's it. And sometimes you'll write about stuff that's going on in the world, but usually it's pretty internal writing, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like I wish I was more an external writer, kind of like looking at the world around me. But I kind of, when I finally understood the structure of songwriting after spending a lot of time with Debbie Gibson and with some other like songwriters I'd sit in on sessions, and once I finally kind of understood the rules, I was like, okay, I can use this as a way to kind of get through life. And it's funny to sit there and say like, at this point being like 12 or 13, so like a young teenager maybe going into high school or in middle school and stuff, like what is there to be introspective about? But I was going through, I think like most kids actually are going through a lot, and they don't have the verbiage to express themselves in a way that feels healthy. I think that's like usually a time in people's lives where they, start exhibiting signs of like delinquency and other things like that. There's like lashing out. There's, grades start to drop because, we're starting to get big feelings and we don't have a way of expressing those big feelings, because arts in general have been kind of suppressed in a lot of public school systems, which was really sad. But I was really lucky that I then kind of understood this form of art that I could use to just kind of deconstruct my own feelings. And since that's kind of how I like started to get really into it, I feel like now, even though it's been like, almost 15 years, that I'm still at a place where I have the vocabulary to be able to express external situations and write about those sort of things, or write about whatever the case may be. If you want me to write a song about a butterfly, I'll do it. But I still find like, my favorite music is the kind of music that makes me feel something. And so I just like to create kind of that. And I've been through, I feel like, as the pandemic has been like a traumatic experience for everyone, I kind of think of it also as like the great equalizer. It didn't matter how much money you had, where you came from, what your last name was, blah, blah, blah. Like everybody was significantly affected by it. And, you know, there's been a rise in, you know, people going to therapy and reaching out, because I think it, in a way, it kind of forced everyone to kind of stop and, at least around us, stop and kind of reevaluate their like themselves. We've like finally had a place to like check in with ourselves and go, oh, are we okay? And the
Yeah.
answer was no. So yeah, I just still continue to do that. Like it's an easier way for me to verbalize how I'm feeling, because I feel like otherwise I'm really not great at it.
Yeah.
And I think like, I don't know. I just think that it's a super helpful form of art. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. Well, and talking about it specifically, can you describe, you know, let's say, doesn't matter necessarily a subject or emotion, but like if it's, let's say it's a heavier emotion, you feel like this big weight in your chest, and it's like, oh, I have to get this out. What does that feel like before? And then as you're writing it, can you describe how that changes? And then basically what do you feel like after? I know the song takes a while to be completed, but like once it's sort of out onto paper and done in whatever form that is, whether that's just you haven't recorded it yet, but it's written and it's a full structure, just describe the transformation that sort of happens internally with that songwriting.
Yeah. I think a perfect example would be kind of one of like a newer one that I've been working on for, unfortunately, a long time. I had like, I think a perfect example would be this idea, this concept of loss and of grief, which I think is something, you know, everybody has experienced. And like, as you get older, like you kind of become far more aware of it too, of just like loss and grief around you for a myriad of reasons. But, you know, as you get older, so does everyone else around you. And I just never knew, like, I could never put or verbalize how the weight of grief and loss kind of makes me feel. And so I saw a TikTok, which I know like your feelings on TikTok, but I watched a TikTok of somebody that was somebody
Well,
that
it's
was,
been nice talking to you, Kacey.
Yeah,
All right. It's
exactly.
thank you for joining us on the program today. No, go ahead. You can plug TikTok on here. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. I was just scrolling through TikTok and I saw someone was reading like a story somebody wrote about this woman was writing from the age, or she was writing at this perspective of like, you know, she like had a family friend that like really liked her, and she was like, oh, like she didn't love herself, so she didn't want to be in a relationship. She was a kid at the time. And finally, after like a year of them being friends, she like realized how much she did love them as well, and, you know, told them her feelings, and they were like, great. Like, let's set a time for, like, we'll have a date on Saturday. But then, and it's just, she was looking forward to it. She was so excited. Saturday comes around in the morning time and she's walking around and she goes to like the local market, and like everyone's kind of like being kind of weird and sad around her. And like someone like offered their condolences, and she's like, what's going on? And she found out that the night before, that the person she realized that she loved, that was like a huge part of her life, ended up passing away in a car accident. And then it kind of like at the end of the story kind of like pulls out, and she's like, and now I'm in my late 70s. And I always sit back and I wonder about what life could have been like had I told them from the beginning that I loved them instead. Maybe they would have been with me and not in that car. And just this whole concept of like, you know, what, you know, if I coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Mm-hmm.
And in the presence of grief too, which I know so many people deal with, are like, well, what if we had more money for treatment? Or what if, you know, I was here instead? Or all these different things that people kind of go through.
Sure.
And I mean, like, I've dealt with my own issues with that before, but like instantly I had this idea for a verse and I was like, so I'm sitting down with my guitar, like the second I finished watching that video, and I had this line of, if I could do this over, I wouldn't waste any time. And I just kept thinking about that. And I could never get past the verse. And I couldn't understand why. Like, I would start to think about like, well, let's explore grief and loss, in the concept of songwriting. And every time I would stop. Like, after I'd rewrite like a second verse, or I get to the chorus and I'd like start crying. I like would just think about all this different stuff going on in my own life, that like it just felt like too much to think about and talk about. And so I would put it away. And then like a month later, I'm writing other stuff, but a month later a song, or I'd be sitting at my piano again and I'm like, okay, let's work on this song some more, because I know the idea there is good. So you have to be a little bit self-indulgent in the first place, where it's like, yeah, this is like something I don't really want to, the wound I don't want to open, but like, dang, like it's a really good idea. That's a really good concept. And so I would open it up and then think about my own life and then start crying again, and I'd put it away. And then it started to like really kind of like get a little serious when like a member of my partner and I's family was hospitalized relatively recently. And I was like the beautiful part about songwriting is that if you write a song that just hits somebody in the right place, it's therapeutic for them as well. Or even for me, where it's like, this says everything I don't know how to just say. And so I've wanted to like figure that out. Mm-hmm. But it just always felt too painful. Like it was too fresh of a wound or something to finish the concept of this idea. And finally, I finally, finish at least the verses and the choruses. So it's like wrapped up pretty much for the most part. But like finally, when I got over that like hump, I just felt this like sense of like whatever internal wound that I was dealing with kind of was healing itself, because I finally was able to express it. I was able to push past the really uncomfortable parts of me that went, I don't want to finish this song because it's too much. And so the aftermath of being able to, figure out how to display how I feel in those moments, like I feel like it's the most therapeutic thing I could do. Like I'm in therapy and like definitely talk to my therapist about all these big feelings. And I think even with talk therapy or cognitive therapy or whatever it is that people are doing, there's still, like, I feel like I can say that this is something that I'm dealing with and we can take the steps for me to help heal that. But like the art part is like art is such a part of who I am that's like, I feel like that's the way to like get the deep into the knot and like really release that tension. So finally, that process of being done with that idea has been extremely therapeutic. So
yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, and I feel like it definitely when you express yourself creatively, you tap into something that, just talking about it or working through it in that way won't touch. And
Beethoven wanted to say hi.
Oh, hello, Beethoven. That was perfect timing, actually. Like right at the end of a really heavy subject, and it's like, here's my cat butt. Look at that.
Yeah, exactly.
It has a knack for doing that all the time at the right time.
Really, he does.
So shifting gears a little bit, getting back to sort of your, the theme of today, which is, mental health and songwriting. When you were a kid working with Debbie, you started to work with other songwriters and producers as well. You mentioned during that time, a couple of them being Tim Pignotta, who worked with Neon Trees, and Gavin McKillcop, who worked with Miley Cyrus and Goo Goo Dolls, I think, if I have that right.
I have worked with those people before. I actually met them through Debbie.
Right.
She would set up these like songwriter sessions. Like Gavin McKillop is really cool because he's been around since like the late 80s, early 90s, working with a lot of artists that I really respect. And then, I know like he has this like long roster of impressive people. The first time I met him, he's like, well, I was working with Miley Cyrus. And I was like, wow, forget everybody else. That's impressive.
Yeah.
But
So,
yeah.
Yeah, that's also pretty amazing experience for a young person to have. And so they began to work with you, record your stuff, and you had a demo eventually at the end of all that you were starting to shop around to major labels and stuff like that. And, a lot of, just summing up that whole experience, there was a lot of rejection and just telling you that you didn't have the right sound, or I think particularly harsh at that age, because we're still talking about being, in your teens, that you didn't have the right look, for what they were going for. And, and that could be hard as like just an adult to hear. But as a kid, it's like you're already, like you said, you're feeling a lot of things about your body and how you're changing. And, just hearing that's, not necessarily, especially from people who are deemed important, whatever that means, or in some kind of musical authority saying, oh, you don't have the right look, as if they're the all-knowing, omnipotent idea of what is the right look for anything. And so talking about it that way, that was an experience you went through really young. How would you say that like affected your creativity and your perspective on things at that time? Because you're dealing with a lot, just even on the, blossoming songwriter side with, working with those people and then being told no like that. Just how did that impact you?
It was quite difficult to hear even at that age, because I think, when I first started doing this, but I also, started that and also started middle school at the same time, which is, I think, when like our bodies like really start to change and like we start to like kind of wake up and like notice our own bodies. And like at the same time, social media was first kind of coming out with like MySpace and Facebook and Twitter. And so I was getting more of an onslaught of like what people are supposed to look like versus like how people actually did look. And so, being like that age, and it was very weird because on one end, like in the songwriting sphere, I was getting like tons of praise because here I am as like a 12-year-old and writing and doing this kind of stuff and doing writing sessions with people of influence. And like, I wasn't told that my voice wasn't good. Like that wasn't part of the conversation. It was just like, oh, we can't sign someone like you. Like, but you could be behind the scenes and still write songs and we can have someone else sing them. And instantly I was like, but why? Like, why am I not good enough to do that? And so I think it creates this like weird, it creates this weird complex within yourself at such a young age when you're already like starting to, your body's starting to change and you and everybody else, is like starting to look at each other like, oh, am I attracted to that kind of a person? And then you start comparing them to the other people that they like. And like, there's all this pressure just at the base level of just being a middle schooler. And so, the thing that was the thing that I ran to for safety, being creative, like songwriting, that sort of thing. And realizing that like, kind of being told in like the nicest way possible that maybe I wasn't the right look to be able to do this for a living at that age. Like it was just so confusing for me. And I think it made it like it made the relationship I had to creating art a little bit more jaded, because I was like, I couldn't understand at the time why the way I looked had anything to do with like, I don't know. I guess in my head, I was thinking that it should be a meritocracy, like, but I'm doing such a good job and I'm working so hard. Like, why shouldn't I be rewarded for that? Because I can't help the way I came out, it's just what I look like. So it was a bit disheartening. And it's something I think that even still to this day, like I have a hard time conceptualizing. I know we've had this conversation privately a lot, but like,
right. Yeah.
It's still something that comes up to this day, and I'm 27 now. So,
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to bring that up because it's something that I feel like, when you're putting yourself out there like that and being vulnerable and then just being dismissed for something so superficial, I feel like that's why people are so afraid to create stuff, because they're just afraid of what, I would say much less you know, some record executive, they're worried about like, you know, what their, you know, coworkers will think of it or what their family will think of it, you know. And I
Yep.
think it's just
Yeah.
I think it's just up to each individual to find their own strength, whatever it is, and just to be able to push forward in that and be able to express themselves despite circumstances.
Yeah, I think, the beautiful part about, like I know social media was just kind of coming to fruition when I was a kid. But the beautiful thing for children or even adults watching this, is that the social media has changed the landscape of it has changed so much that, you could post a video of your art on social media and like, yeah, your family's going to see it. They might have opinions, but they're through like TikTok and stuff with their algorithm, it's going to push it to people that aren't just your family, that it push past those like initial people that like doubt kind of what you can do or think that they might be the ones instilling this belief within you that like you're not good enough to do something like that. Like, well, here's the court of public opinion. People are going to find it and they're going to resonate with your own work. And so, I mean, that's like the beautiful part about all of that is that, yeah, you can have those family members and those coworkers that find what you do embarrassing, but more often than not, like, one, they're just kind of jealous that they too don't have like either the confidence to post themselves in some way or put themselves out there, which I think is the whole part about being an artist. But it's at the same time, like, their opinion is so like there are only like 5 people watching your video. And if you get like 1,000 views, the 995 other people could really like it, Yeah.
So. Absolutely. And it seems like, like you just mentioned earlier, you were going back to AVC and just graduated and since that time, I think, and, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, in looking at like the great songwriters of all time, or even some of the ones that are more the songwriter, and they might not be household names, but they're considered some of the greatest writers of all time. John Prine comes to mind. He's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't put out his first album until way, way later in his life, and it took him living a whole life's worth of experiences and rejections and stuff like that to be shaped into the person that he became. And I feel like what people like in those business positions don't understand is that everybody's on their own timeline and they're going to develop at their own pace. But then not only that, it kind of, in a way, it's like you're taking all these different things and you're translating it into work eventually. And you kind of need to be, everybody has to, go through their own paces and pay their own dues, I guess, in their own way. And then that translates into the work that they create. I don't know how you feel about all that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it's something that I've really struggled with understanding because I got, attention at such a young age. And like, and I'm really grateful for that attention. I'm really grateful for that information that I learned in that time frame. But then that initial rejection, I think, like at the time, I didn't see it as like a blessing because I'm like, well, I'm writing good songs and this and that, but I'm, a 12-year-old doesn't have the same perspective as someone my age, and right. Even someone who's like 20, 22, like when we first started our band, I was like, this is going to pop off so fast. Like I was ready to race to Hollywood. I was like, this is it. And I like, and I would get consistently frustrated about even that timeline. And in that, time since, we've had member changes and we've had like sound changes and all kinds of stuff. And I realized only relatively recently that like all of this has led to this new discovery of sound and this new perspective on life. And I think truly, like, while I also love a lot of artists that are in their late teens, early 20s, like, Billie Eilish is really cool and has a really interesting perspective on life, and Olivia Rodrigo as well. Like, she's also writing for kids, and like me at my age, I don't really like, I remember that time in my life and I remember feeling that same sort of angst, but like, I don't have those same like, I don't have that same idea about life anymore, if that makes sense. I'm probably not explaining it super well, but then you look at somebody like Adele, who had this understanding of the world at such a young age. She, 21 being like her biggest album, and it came out when she was 21 years old, but she's unique in that sense where her art doesn't really resonate with the same people that like Olivia Rodrigo or Billie Eilish's art resonates with. But when I went to go see her back in December, the crowd was full of people like 12 to like 70 or 80, because she has this understanding and this perspective that comes with age that I think is important. And I know it's hard in this like rat race to sit there and say, well, this person reached this milestone at this age, so I have to do that too. But then you do look at people like John Prine and you go, yeah, but great art takes time. And it's so hard. Ugh. But yeah.
No, absolutely. Well, and you hit it right there. It's a perspective on life, and it might not seem like it when you're in it, but as your work evolves, then you're usually evolving as a person. And so it's one of those things that it follows in tandem with each other, especially if you're staying true to yourself and your craft. Those things are going to change. Another good example of that, I think, is Leanne Rimes, because I don't know if you know how she was initially discovered, or if for anyone that doesn't know the story, there was a songwriter, I forget his name, but he wrote for Patsy Cline back in the day, famous, legendary country singer. And he wrote a song for her that I don't think she ever got to sing, I think, for whatever the case was. And so he was saving that song for somebody that he felt like was sort of the next Patsy Cline, or had that energy or that vibe. And for whatever means it happened through that, he had heard her sing and then basically gave her the song to sing and said, I want you to sing that. And Leanne Rimes, at a very young age, it was like 13 or 14, sounded exactly like Patsy Cline, like almost not a clone, but really close to it, and had that same energy and had such a weight to her voice even at that age that propelled her. And that was one of her biggest songs. It's called Blue, and it's very old school country. It's like a lonesome country ballad, And I was working LPAC when she came through, and I had heard that song because I told somebody I was working that show, and I didn't really know her music, and they told me that story. I went, oh, that's interesting, looked up the song, heard her sing it at LPAC, and now she's considerably older, lived a life of very high highs and low lows, and been through lots of stuff. And when she sang it on that stage, I just remember standing there watching her and going like, oh, now she gets what the song is about. And I'm not one to comment on her life, but just from a objective listener perspective, you hear a 13 or 14-year-old kid sing about Blue. She nailed it technically and was perfect, but when she sings it on stage as an adult now, it's like, with the lyrics, I'm sure she's channeling stuff that she went through into that performance.
Yeah.
Like you could just tell. And I feel like, yeah, she might have had a hit with that when she was younger, but it's, as far as the making art thing, if we're just purely, again, talking about the meritocracy part of it and making art and the quality of what we're doing, it's about putting our best work out there and our best foot forward. And being able to express yourself honestly with where you're at now is usually what resonates with people the most,
Yeah.
I think, at least, maybe not have the widest appeal, but at least if you're purely talking about the impact you'll have on people, the people that do hear it, you're going to have that impact for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think another great example of that even is Joni Mitchell with Both Sides Now. She first released a song in the 60s. And it was in a different key, and it was a lot faster, and it was kind of folky and exciting. And then she re-released some of her music and like recorded it in like the early 2000s, and she re-recorded Both Sides Now. And it's like, you can just hear the years in her voice. I mean, it's considerably lower, much more raspy. And it's like, even though that was a song that she had written in her young age, like she grew into that song too. And I think you could feel like all of the life experience in every single line. I think that that's like also such a, like, I love that version of that song. And when I remember when I first heard it, I was like, this is the peak of songwriting. And then I heard the other version later, which I think is very backwards. When I did, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I don't know. I just think that's such a fascinating, I think it goes also into this whole concept of like mental health and songwriting too. Like, you can write something at the perspective that you have in your late teens, early 20s, that like maybe it's always been true, but there's like more truth and weight behind it as you age. So I think that's really interesting too, as well. But
Absolutely. Yeah, I would totally agree. Well, so one last question I wanted to ask you. Again, trying to relate this to, I would say, people, that may not, express themselves creatively or may have thought about that or anything else. I think that, well, this is kind of a two-part question. So I would say, I think anybody has the capability of being creative, whether they have a natural inclination for it or not.
mhm.
And I think that it's part of it is innate talent, but if innate talent without craft, like you discovered, at that young age, and without putting hours into it to develop it, is only going to take you so far. So I feel like nearly anybody could be, creative in one form or another, or have like outlets of expression that they could, do just for their own benefit. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah, definitely. I think that a perfect way to kind of like figure that out for whoever it is that's listening, think about like the art that you consume the most. Is it the radio, or do you really like drawing little doodles on the side of your pages, or do you really like podcasting? Even I would say that that's a form of creative art. So there's a lot of different classes out here specifically that offer an opportunity for you to grow whatever interest you might have. And I also think it's never too late to learn something new. If you're like, I've always wanted to play the violin or something, like, you can start. You don't have to be, really young and become like a prodigy later. I think that like this community here in Palmdale has a really good, there's so many classes that you can take, whether that be like in Marie Kerr Park or just like around town or at the college out here. I think it's never too late to find that creative outlet, because I always think it's a really helpful part of being a human, is to be able to express yourself.
Yeah, and that you kind of started to answer my next question, which was, how do you think people could do that? But naming off a lot of those, different resources available was a good place to start for sure.
Yeah, I mean, even like one of my friends, our mutual friend Janelle,
Janelle Crampton, yep.
Janelle Crampton, yes, she used to be in marching band and symphonic band in high school, and she's been out of high school for a very long time, but needed this creative outlet for herself, and found that Marie Kerr Park has like, they have a symphonic band that they do on Wednesdays, and you don't really have to audition. You can just like go and like be a part of the band. So that's been something for her that when I talked to her about it, she said it's been monumental for her mental health, even to just be able to just go do something that she used to do like forever ago.
Right. Yeah. It's I feel like and maybe this is a bad example for people that go, oh, I don't even like doing this anyway, but I've heard about working out. It's usually, I've been starting to get into running, trying to slowly but surely, and trying to make that part of my routine. And from the people I've talked to, they're like, how did you start doing this regularly? Like, how did you get disciplined at doing this when you don't feel like doing it? And it's just literally kind of that same impulse you're talking about with writing that really difficult song. It's like, you have to push past the part of you that's resistant to it.
Yeah.
If thinking about it on your own time, you get excited about it, or you're wanting to try it, and then that voice of doubt creeps in and tells you, no, don't do that. People are going to think it's stupid, whatever it is. If you push past that for the first few minutes and you get into it, or you just see it through, then I would say more often than not, I've always felt better when I've put myself out there like that. And you just test yourself in little ways like that. And then, once you're at the end of it, it's like, oh, why did I even have any weird, resistance to, wanting to do this, and it's a good exercise to get yourself out of that mindset, I think.
Definitely. I think there's always going to be, no matter what it is that you try to do, whether that be working out for the first time or learning a new instrument or trying to teach yourself how to paint or knit or whatever it is that you want to do to express yourself, there's going to be a significant period that's going to be very, very hard. The learning curve is not easy. And that's the part I think where everybody gets kind of caught up in like quits, is like, thinking about like the self-doubt or even the doubt other people will like cast on you, or just even just how difficult it is to push past this like little area of learning, this like hump. But once you get over that hump, it's so funny. Another TikTok I saw, and this is very quick, but I literally
3 TikTok plugs in one podcast. How
dude,
dare you?
hey, they should hire me.
Yeah.
But someone, yeah, this one person like drew this little picture of like a mountain, and they're like, this is Cringe Mountain, and it doesn't matter what you're trying to do, you will always be on Cringe Mountain. Everybody's at the bottom of the valley. There's this mountain. Once you get over Cringe Mountain, you're in the land of cool. But everyone has to be on Cringe Mountain before they get to the land of cool. So
I think I built a shack on Cringe Mountain. I haven't left ever since.
Hey, but you know what?
Guy with tin foil in the windows going, get off my property. Yeah, I think that's where I'm at.
Yeah. I mean, the cool part about it though is that, all the people that might sit there and think that what you're doing is cringe, like even if it is something like I'm going to knit a sweater for somebody's birthday for Christmas or whatever,
yeah.
The people that are looking up at the mountain and going, that's so cringe, they're farther behind than you are. So just the mountain is steep and you must keep climbing the mountain, but then you will be in the land of cool.
You know what's at the base of Cringe Mountain before Cool Town?
What?
No, nothingville. That's what's going on there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't think of a better metaphor to close out this session of Bridge Builders. Yeah.
Embrace Cringe Mountain.
Yeah. Hey, that should be the name of our next EP. Embrace Cringe Mountain.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, we'll never be cool, and then the artwork will be us on top of Cringe Mountain. I think that's
crying.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good idea.
Oh yeah, I'm down.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Kacey. I appreciate you taking the time to join us today on Bridge Builders. And for those that are interested in checking out her music, you can check the description below for all the links to all that goodness. And again, thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this program to learn more about the arts and participate more in arts in our community. And we shall see you next time.